26-year-old Courtney Clenney is a social media star. She has over 2 million followers and has built a very successful career. While she is very visible on Instagram, she also has an OnlyFans page. This is a place where her fans can pay her through the app for access to videos and images you will never see on Instagram. Courtney was in a relationship with a man named Christian Obonselli. They lived together in Texas before moving to Miami into a super ultra luxurious condo on the water. On April 3rd of this year, Courtney stabbed Christian to death in that condo. She is claiming self-defense, but prosecutors say she was the aggressor the day she killed Christian. Tonight, we will take a closer look at this relationship as we hear from a neighbor who saw and heard a lot of what happened between Courtney and Christian. Then, we'll take a closer look at one of their confrontations caught on video in the elevator of their Miami home. What does this video reveal about what happened the day Courtney killed Christian? I'm Vinnie Politan. Great to have you with us tonight here on Closing Arguments. And this is a story a lot of people are talking about, and it's really about a relationship. And we've covered trials like this in the past, in the very recent past. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, the ultimate toxic relationship. We saw it play out inside a courtroom, but during the course of that case, we heard about all this back and forth that was going on between the two, the mutual violence inside that household and in that relationship. And it made a lot of people, myself including, wonder, like, why would you stay with someone? Why would you be with someone? Like, I've covered enough of domestic violence cases where it's all entirely one-sided. And I understand, and I've spoken to experts about the mentality and what happens to a victim in those circumstances. But like in Johnny Depp and Amber Heard's case, it was back and forth. It was volatile. Why would you stay together? Why would you do that? Extremely toxic, right? Two people that just aren't right for one another. Well, you can say the same about the relationship between Courtney and Christian. This was a toxic relationship, but it was much worse. This is a toxic relationship with homicide. Because Courtney killed Christian. We know that. She's admitted that. She's claiming self-defense in all of it. But there's a history between these two. And again, you wonder, with that history, you know, what kept them together and how bad was it? Or was it not as bad as we think it was? Like we've gotten little bits and pieces of this relationship through some of our reporting, but also through police reports, et cetera. They lived in Texas at first, but they also lived in Miami, and in Miami is where all this happened. And from the way things have been described, these two were living La Vida Loca down there in Miami. I mean, a luxurious life, but the complaints and everything else that was going on from neighbors about, you know, what are these two doing? What is going on? Like, why would you be that young with that much money, living in a beautiful city, should be having the time of your lives? And they weren't. And they became a nuisance in that building. They're on the verge of getting kicked out. And that, again, was because of what was going on in their toxic relationship. But as I said, before they were ever in Miami, they were toxic in Texas as well. And on this show tonight, we're going to speak with one of their neighbors and to find out exactly what he saw, what he heard, what he knew, interaction, what was it like living with this couple in the same building, in the room above you. We'll get into all of that. But for those of you who don't really know this story, Court TV legal correspondent Joy Lim Nakrin has more for us tonight.
A social media sensation, now a suspected killer. 26-year-old Courtney Taylor-Flenny is charged with second-degree murder in the death of her 27-year-old boyfriend, Christian Obonselli.
The chief medical examiner of Miami-Dade County determined that Christian's cause of death was a stab to the chest. Christian was stabbed as the knife punctured the subclavian artery in his right chest.
It all happened following a fight at the couple's luxury apartment in Miami's upscale Edgewater neighborhood, and prosecutors say fights were common in this volatile relationship.
Evidence gathered during the investigation of Christian's death showed that since November of 2020, he and the defendant, Clenney, had been involved in an extremely tempestuous and combative relationship.
Officials say their apartment building management received so many complaints about their loud fights, they came close to being evicted. Building cameras captured this fight in February, just weeks before Obumseli was killed.
The chief medical examiner further determined that the knife entered Christian's chest in a downward angle to the depth of 3 inches. In other words, the medical examiner has indicated that the fatal knife wound, which entered Christian's chest, was the result of a forceful downward thrust penetrating to the depth of over just 3 inches into that artery you just saw.
Clenney's attorney claims she was acting in self-defense after Obumseli attacked her. In this statement to Court TV, Frank Prieto states, quote, "It is an absolute injustice to charge a victim of domestic violence and human trafficking with a crime." He went on to say, "We will vigorously defend Courtney and clear her of this unfounded and baseless charge." But questions are being raised about her claim. This video suggests Clenney was the aggressor, as it captures her repeatedly striking Obumseli. Clenney's attorney notes that the video does not depict the events leading up to what was captured in the elevator, and in a statement said, quote, "Obumseli was the abuser, the worst kind of abuser. He would manipulate and abuse Courtney in private when he thought nobody was around."
The violent and toxic 2-year relationship of Christian Obumseli and Courtney Clenney did not have to end in tragedy with Christian's murder as a victim of domestic violence.
The OnlyFans star first rose to fame as a bodybuilder.
My name is Courtney Taylor, and I'm about 8 days out from my first show, the NPC West Coast Classic. And today we're going to hit some back and buys, so let's get started.
She soon became a social media celebrity with some 2 million followers on Instagram, where she frequently posted pictures of the man she's now accused of murdering.
This homicide has gained some notoriety since the defendant, Clenney, is an internet social media personality and influencer under the name of Courtney Taylor.
Now, Clenney is finding that her fame has a downside.
Yeah, you should go, because you just killed your boyfriend. Yeah, you did.
So this hour, we're going to try to get a better idea about this relationship and what exactly was going on, sometimes behind closed doors. So let's begin. 2 great guests joining us right off the top here. Joining me tonight, Courtney Clenney's former neighbor, Aiden Nesvitsky, is with us. Also with us tonight, Miami Herald reporter David Ovalle as well down in Miami, doing great reporting on this. I want to begin with Aiden, though, because chronologically they were in Texas first. So, Aiden, explain to us, first of all, where it was that you were neighbors with her. Was it in Austin?
Yes, it was in Austin. We lived just south of downtown, right next to the Colorado River. They lived in the penthouse unit on the 11th floor of the apartment, and then I lived in the 10th floor corner unit.
And how would you describe this apartment complex? Was it mostly young people? Was the penthouse sort of I mean, most penthouses are usually more expensive, a little fancier than the rest of the building. Give us an idea of what this building is like.
Yeah, it was a building of mostly young professionals. I would say 90% of the residents were younger than 40. The penthouse unit was pretty nice. It was, I think, around 2,000 square feet. It had a wraparound balcony. I know when I was looking at the unit, I think the rent price of the penthouse was listed at $5,000 or $6,000 a month. So a pretty pricey unit.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, now take us there. So they're living in the unit above you. Tell us about the first time you interacted with either Courtney or Christian.
So the first time I met Courtney was in the elevator. I was with my roommate at the time. and she was moving in with Toby. We interacted in the elevator very briefly. She just said that she was moving into the penthouse. She kind of made it sound like she was living there alone and that she was, successful, but we didn't know that she was actually moving in there with Toby at the time. She actually lived in a one-bedroom in the same building and then moved into the penthouse to move in with her boyfriend.
Okay.
That was the first time I met her. She came off as very friendly.
Okay, and when you say Toby, is that the person we've been referring to as Christian here, the man that she stabbed to death?
Yeah, in passing.
Okay.
Exactly, yeah, in passing, we called him Toby.
All right, so when was the first indication that there may have been trouble in this relationship, or there were problems? What did you see? What did you hear?
Right. I would say about a few months into her moving in with him, we started to hear some disturbances. The floors and walls were pretty thick in the apartment, so we couldn't make out what was being said or who was saying what exactly. But we did hear a lot of arguments going on within the first couple months of her moving in. And then they, gradually got worse over time. I know, on some occasions we would hear glass being shattered, banging on the walls and the floors. And this was ongoing from the first few months that they moved in up until they had moved out earlier in 2022.
So how long were they there, and were police ever responding to this penthouse?
They were there for a little less than 2 years. I believe she moved in late May or June of 2020, and then they moved out earlier in 2022. Yes, the police were called at least 2 times, if I remember correctly. I do not know if it was a neighbor who called the police or if it was one of them who called the police. I want to say it was a neighbor, just because I think if it was one of them calling police, we would have found that come up in the court case or from one of the attorneys.
Right. So from your perspective, the observations, did you ever have conversations with them about what was going on up there with the glass breaking and everything else?
I didn't feel like I knew them well enough to confront them about that. It was something that we kind of talked together amongst neighbors. We thought we were better suited to, reach out to, law enforcement or to the building itself to handle that, just because we didn't know exactly what was going on up there. So we didn't feel the need to step in.
And did you ever see either one of them bruised or cut, black eyes or anything like that?
No, I never saw anything like that on either one of them, but they did argue quite frequently. So it could have happened when, it could have happened, definitely. Maybe not when I saw them, or maybe they covered it up or something similar.
All right, David Ovalle. Then they moved to your town, Miami. They're in this, I keep talking about it because I'm a little jealous, this beautiful condo that they had down there in the Paraiso building. On the arrest warrant, we saw this, and I want you to give us a few more details here. One, Paraiso security and building staff documented so many incidents of arguing, including from tenants as far as 2 floors above the defendant and victim's unit, that one Paraiso management was moving toward legal action to evict the defendant and victim from the condominium. David, how bad was it? What have you heard, and have you spoken with any of their neighbors down there in Miami?
It was pretty bad. I want to just back up real quick. There actually was a couple other incidents that were documented in Austin. Right before they moved to Florida, actually, the police were called to one of the apartments that they were staying in, and they found just a bunch of stuff on the lawn, a bunch of belongings that had been tossed out onto the lawn. And when they talked to Christian and to Courtney, they both said, yeah, we're about to move to Florida and we're not sure we want to go anymore. And so that was sort of the impetus for this huge domestic dispute that eventually they cooled off and no one was arrested. But it was sort of a harbinger for things to come, right? So their move to Florida was already marred by by indecision and toxicity. And yeah, it continued once they got to Miami to live this sort of influencer lifestyle that ended up going south.
Aiden, did you ever see any stuff flying out of the windows?
I did, in fact. On one occasion, we heard some noise coming from upstairs. I was sitting in the living room with my roommate and my girlfriend, and a painting of a tiger came flying off and crashed onto our balcony. And it was a pretty scary situation.
Unreal. David, so they're a young couple. They clearly have problems. Whatever's going on here in this relationship. Any indication that either one of their families knew or gave them advice, or any of their friends or anyone else in their circle? Or was this basically something that is happening between two people behind closed doors?
Well, certainly Courtney's mother knew about some of this stuff because it's referenced in the arrest warrant that she was actually on the phone with Courtney at the time of the stabbing. And also referenced in the warrant, the mom had actually come and stayed with Courtney for a couple weeks while they were having, while Christian had moved out and they had been separated, and then they got back together once the mom left. So definitely at least the mom knew. As for Christian's family, his lawyer tells me that they really didn't know a whole lot, that he didn't talk to the family a whole lot about his issues with his girlfriend. So a lot of this stuff they were learning for the first time. And in fact, the video that has just been playing right now in the elevator, they hadn't really seen that up until right before the press conference.
Now, in this volatile, toxic relationship, is it clear, David, whether it's mutual physical violence, or is that kind of up in the air and something that both sides may be arguing during the course of the trial that we expect?
Well, I don't think anyone argues that it wasn't a two-way street when it comes to the conflict and the yelling and the screaming and all of that. But when you listen carefully to the prosecutor's press conference and read the warrant, they specifically say in there that she was more of the aggressor, that she had a history of attacking him, and she had a history of being the aggressor. Now, some of that's a little vague. We only saw that one video, but in court today, I want to tell you, the prosecutor actually said, that one video was only like a little tiny part of what is a much bigger load of evidence that they have against Courtney. And there's been references by the police and by the state that a lot of that's going to be text messages, whatever's found on phones. So presumably other photos, videos, media. So there's going to be a lot more stuff to come out. And I'm pretty sure they haven't released, but just a tiny fraction of that.
And anything from the defense seems to be saying, no, it's the other way around. Like when he abuses her, it's when nobody else is there, so no one ever sees it. Is there any history, whether police responding, arrests, or anything involving Christian abusing Courtney?
Not that I've seen. Now, there was an arrest in Las Vegas, and that was when Courtney was arrested. They were living in Austin at the time, but they were in Vegas, and it was just the typical, they start fighting, and I guess he was really, he told the police he was upset because she, all they ever did was drink and party, and he just wanted to enjoy Vegas a little bit more. So he's actually like hanging out on the couch, and she apparently throws like a bottle at him and almost hits him, and there was a whole, or actually I think she did hit him, and then they ended up calling the police, and she actually ended up getting arrested for a domestic battery, misdemeanor battery in Las Vegas. I don't know whatever happened to that case. The disposition is unclear, but certainly that was the only actual arrest that any of the two had for any kind of domestic squabbles.
It's amazing. What you just described was one of the biggest moments in the Johnny Depp-Amber Heard case, where Johnny Depp alleged Amber Heard threw a bottle at him. And I started this whole thing off talking about a toxic relationship, and we're seeing even more parallels. All right, David.
One thing I did want to mention too is that I spoke with another former boyfriend of hers, and he said that it was a similar pattern. He didn't want to say a whole lot, but he did say that it was very familiar when he saw what was going on with Christian, and that he said, look, the one thing I will tell you is I had things thrown at me as well. So certainly this was not anything that was new to anyone that knew Courtney.
All right, David and Aiden staying with us. When we come back, we're going to bring in our psychological experts to analyze some of the things that Aiden and David are talking about here tonight. Plus, coming up in the next hour. In Delaware County, Ohio, Matthew Moore accused of murdering his wife and staging it to look like a suicide. The jury getting to see and hear a lot from the defendant tonight. We take a look at his interrogation while his wife was missing. Listen closely. Why does he refer to her in the past tense if she was only missing?
As far as your relationship? No, she loved me.
Emily Noble was reported missing a day after celebrating her 52nd birthday.
Her body was staged to appear as though it was a suicide. That was absolutely not the case. Emily's husband was arrested. 2 different counts of murder.
The question is, was she murdered or was it suicide?
This was clearly a homicide based on the injuries that were sustained.
Our cameras taking you inside the courtroom as this dramatic case unfolds.
The staged suicide murder trial. Live coverage weekdays at 9/8 Central on Court.
0 out of 10. I'll videotape her right now. You should go. Yeah, you should go. Because you just killed your boyfriend. Yeah, you did. Yeah, and yeah. Okay, cool.
There she is, Courtney Clenney. That's a few days after she had stabbed her boyfriend, and she's in the lobby at the Grand Hotel in Miami. And you can see people know her. People know who she is, a social media star. Let me bring back in my guest, still with me, Courtney Clenney's former neighbor in Texas, Aiden Nesevinsky, Miami Herald reporter David Ovalle, and joining us now in Los Angeles, clinical and forensic neuropsychologist and associate professor at Pepperdine University, Dr. Judy Ho, and in New York City, psychotherapist, host of Talking Live on Facebook Watch and the Bite Side podcast, Dr. Robbie Ludwig. All right, full house here tonight. Dr. Judy Ho, from your perspective, we spent a lot of time talking about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard and their toxicity. This case, much more extreme as it results in homicide. Your thoughts about what's going on in the world of these 2 young people who seem to have a lot of money, but are fighting a lot. I mean, Aiden is describing all these fights in the apartment above him. David's talking about what was happening down in Miami.
Well, Vinny, in a lot of domestic violence cases, this is sort of the pattern. You hear that there's been squabbles that have been increasingly aggressive over time. And sometimes people say, well, that means that there was mutual abuse going on. And while that may be true, if Courtney was the primary aggressor, and I think that video that everybody is referring to is painting her as the primary aggressor. Now, that may or may not be true, but that video shows that she has a propensity to do that. And he also has a propensity to be more in a self-defensive stance rather than also be hitting back at the same time. This is why a lot of professionals in my field, Vinny, don't really talk about this idea of mutual abuse as being as commonplace in domestic violence. Generally, there is one primary abuser, and the other person might be more defensive, but may at times or occasionally engage in what also is physical aggression.
Dr. Robbie Ludwig, the other part of this, right? As David reported to us, out in Vegas, she gets arrested for pulling an Amber, threw a bottle at him. She threw a bottle at him.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get inside this relationship. What keeps people together when there is this volatility?
Well, sometimes there's a familiarity to this kind of relationship. It's repeating a pattern that they grew up with, or it feels familiar. So on that level, it's like a toxic bonding that we see. But we certainly see that Courtney has an intermittent explosive disorder where she's very inclined to be violent and volatile. And that's her natural state. She's easily triggered. And we do see the boyfriend acting in a more defensive mode. what we do know, according to the studies, is that women can just as much as men introduce violence into a relationship. And in some cases, they can do it more so than men. They were just viewed as not being as problematic because women are not as big as men. But as we see in these cases, they still can be pretty lethal. And it looks like Courtney, on one level, was getting something out of it. There's also the enjoyment and pleasure of being in control and feeling dominant. And I think if we scratch the surface and understand more about Courtney's history, we can see a little bit more of why that might in fact be the case, why this is pleasurable on some level for her.
Aiden, you were neighbors for a couple of years. You've told us about them throwing stuff out the windows, the broken glass, the fights. Did you ever see them in loving moments, you know, whether holding hands, you know, walking into the building? I don't know if you guys had a pool or not, or hanging out. Did you observe any of that?
Yeah, I saw them in passing pretty frequently. They were always very friendly and seemed pretty cordial when we would see them in the elevator, in the hallways. I saw them at the Austin City Limits music festival together at a concert, and they seemed to be enjoying themselves. They seemed to be having a great time. So it was very interesting seeing them doing public appearances versus what I would hear when the doors were shut.
And were they loving moments as well? Like, people can be having a good time, but were there like those, did it seem like, oh, look at those two, how cute, something like that?
I would say they were just, you know, typical couple moments, you know, walking around, holding hands. They didn't seem like, you know, infatuated with each other, but they weren't, you know, aggressive or, you know, standoffish with each other either.
Gotcha. Sounds more like an old married couple, right? They're, you know, not. I would picture like young and in love. It would be a little different out in public. David Ovalle, what about this relationship? Historically, what do we know about how and they got together and you know, it had to be another part of the relationship beyond the violence.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you can. I know I believe they got together in Texas. And they had lived there in Austin, and then they came to Miami. And I think, you know, the interesting thing about right now in Miami is, you know, you're getting an influx of people from all over the country, from New York, from Texas, from California, and they're moving here to restart themselves, to reinvigorate themselves, to live that sort of Instagram influencer, sun-drenched lifestyle. And that's certainly what they were trying to do here. I mean, you know, he worked in the crypto industry. She, of course, was working, doing the modeling and all of that. So it really is sort of like almost like a cliche of the people coming to Miami right now. And certainly it was something that they were hoping to have a fresh start. And it just didn't end up that way. And it went south pretty quickly. I mean, they'd only been here for what, 4 or 5 months before all this happened.
Aiden, did people in the building know, you know, what they did for a living? Was you know, did people talk about, oh yeah, she's on Instagram, or oh, she's on OnlyFans, that sort of knowledge of what their lives were like?
Yeah, good question. I think it depends on, you know, who you are and what you do. If you kept up with the, you know, building gossip, then I think it was pretty obvious what she did. He was a lot more private in what he did for a living. I didn't know what his profession was. I obviously knew he was successful if he was living in the penthouse alone beforehand. But yeah, it was common knowledge for most people to know what she did for a living. She was very, you know, public about it. She trained, you know, at you know, one of the more upscale gyms in Austin at the Equinox on South Congress. So I think it was pretty known that she did, you know, what she did.
All right, Aiden Vinsky and David Ovalle, thank you both so much. And make sure you're following David on Twitter, everywhere else. So much information on this. Great reporter with the Miami Herald. And Aiden, we appreciate your time and your insight tonight and giving us a clearer picture of what was going on in their relationship. The doctors are staying, though. Dr. Judy Ho, Dr. Robbie Ludwig staying with us. as we take a closer look at what happened in that elevator. We'll also bring in our law enforcement expert to get his take on what's going on right here. Don't go away.
Evidence gathered during the investigation of Christian's death showed that since November of 2020, he and the defendant, Clenney, had been involved in an extremely tempestuous and combative relationship. As an example, it was learned that the security and building staff at the Miami apartment documented many incidents of loud arguments between the couple after they moved into the building in January of 2022.
All right, there were absolutely problems beforehand. And, you know, investigators are looking at this, and this is all going to be part of the trial, trying to figure out this relationship. But I want to bring back in my guests. So with us, Dr. Robbie Ludwig, Dr. Judy Ho, still with me, and joining us now in New York City, former New York City Assistant Commissioner, former NYPD Sergeant Special Assignment, Dr. Keith Taylor is with us. Great to see everyone. All right, so everybody's a doctor. They're all doctors except for me. I feel so small right now. Let's do this. Let's watch this video together. This is the elevator video. We've been playing it, but let's really pick this apart. And Dr. Keith Taylor, I want to start with you. As you watch what happens and transpires inside this elevator, from your perspective, if this was a piece of evidence you were given, I mean, is there enough to file charges against somebody here?
Certainly harassment, assault, depending on the degree, severity of what the individuals are doing. I see her pulling at his hair, possibly causing injuries to his head. Also, you know, she's hitting him quite a bit, which you can't really tell from the video, but may or may not be causing some contusion, some level of bruising that would certainly allow him to file charges against her.
And do you see anything in this video that makes it look like mutual abuse, or are you seeing what I'm seeing? Very one-sided.
I see the arguing back and forth, and because domestic violence, intimate partner violence, includes not just physical violence, but also emotional violence for the purpose of power and control of the relationship. So there's a lot going on there besides the physical aspect of the video.
Now, Dr. Judy Ho, as you watch this video, what do you see? What are your concerns? And if this couple came to you, how would you help them work through this?
Well, Vinny, I think that oftentimes when we look at patterns of domestic violence, it is a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power or control over their partner. And so it's not just physical, but there's emotional, economic, and other psychological actions or threats of actions that can influence another person. They have had seemingly a very long history of contemptuous back and forth in the relationship, a lot of arguments, a lot of escalation, and most likely, this has been something where not only has it escalated over time, but they have established a sort of a pattern in terms of what kind of abuse one person levies on another. So it's possible here that Courtney is the person who utilizes primarily physical abuse, for example, but it's also possible that Christian plays a role. Maybe he utilizes emotional or other forms of psychological actions to try to maintain power and control over Courtney. So what I see in this video is really something that didn't just occur one time. This is a long time pattern. If this couple came to me, I would assume that they would probably play the blame game and talk about how the other person is the perpetrator, but most likely each of them do play a role. And here what we see in the video is that although she is the primary physical perpetrator and he's looking like he's defending himself, he's certainly yelling back, he's certainly seeming like he's scolding her, and we don't know exactly what led to what happened eventually in the elevator.
And that is something that her attorney has pointed out, saying this is irrelevant to the case and you don't know what led up to them being in the elevator. Dr. Robbie Ludwig, I want to ask you, because there may be people watching right now who are in a relationship that has some similarities to what these two went through before she stabbed and killed him. And I'm wondering, can relationships like this actually be fixed? Or once you get to the point of this level or this type of violence and this type of actions, is it one that, listen, the parties should just move on?
Well, I think when there is a desire to fix a relationship, it may take a while, but the possibilities are there for people to heal and to get better. If you have someone who is a sociopath, someone who really has no empathy, no feelings, gets off on being hostile and abusive, and really doesn't want a loving relationship, then that kind of dynamic cannot be fixed. You really need two people who are willing to look at themselves and their own histories and to ask, how did we get here? What is it in my history or about my self-esteem or about my mood dysregulation that allowed me to be in a relationship that is so toxic and unhealthy? Because some people are really drawn and addicted to the toxic part of the relationship. So it's not the way we imagine relationships to be, that people want a loving relationship. Sometimes people are addicted to the toxicity and the danger and the damaging parts of each other.
Dr. Keith Taylor, there was one incident that resulted in charges, and then that case kind of was dismissed. It involved her allegedly throwing a bottle at him in Vegas. Are we at the point now, do you think, in law enforcement that there's an acknowledgement that domestic violence is not one way? And the reason I say that, we've been through the Johnny Depp case. We watched that video of the young couple. I can't believe the name is escaping me. The biggest story of last year, Moab, Utah. Some Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie. How does that happen? I forget names. But Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie, we saw that video, and police there determined that she was the aggressor there. So are we in a place now where law enforcement and people who are responding to this are acknowledging that it could be, and I'm not saying Gabby was the aggressor in that, I think they got it wrong, but they were open-minded to that, hey, violence in a relationship goes both ways, can go both ways.
I think a good example of law enforcement getting more involved is here in New York City. They have domestic violence officers at each precinct, and they work with victim advocates so that when police encounter this very common, hundreds of thousands of calls each year in New York City, they have a foundation, a basis with which to have follow-up and offer all kinds of services as needed. I suspect that with this particular instance where they're able to go from state to state, place to place, there was no coordinating entity to be able to help them or to follow up on the multiple incidents that occurred. And this resulted in very dire consequences.
Absolutely. And to me, all domestic violence is horrific and sad, but I find it especially troubling when it's young couples and there's so much on the front end of life to live, and move on, find someone. There's so many people out there. You'll find the right one at some point, but if you two just are mixing it up at a point in your life where everything's going great, I mean, how are things going to be when things are going bad? I mean, things are going amazing for both of them. It's frustrating and sad and tragic all at the same time. Dr. Keith Taylor, thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to go from 3 doctors back down to 2. Dr. Robbie Ludwig, Dr. Judy Ho staying with us. What we're going to talk about when we come back is the transition, the seeming transition in front of our own eyes on social media of Courtney Clenney going from one type of influencer to a completely different type. And do we think that influenced what was happening in her life? We're going to do that. Plus, coming up in the next hour. And on the docket tonight in Broward County, Florida, the Parkland school shooter on trial. The jury has one decision to make: life or death for the mass murderer. The state has presented their evidence, and now it's time to hear from the defense. What will they say to try to save the killer's life?
Calculative, manipulative, and deadly.
My name is Courtney Taylor, and I'm about 8 days out from my first show, the NPC West Coast Classic. And today we're going to hit some back and vice, so let's get started.
That was Courtney Clenney back in 2016 when she was a competitive bodybuilder. The Texas native eventually left bodybuilding and started gaining popularity on the internet. Known online as Courtney Taylor, the 26-year-old has more than 2 million followers on Instagram and modeled on the adult subscription service OnlyFans. And according to the police report, Courtney Taylor was active on Instagram, posting live videos on the day that she killed her boyfriend back in April. So sort of a transformation, right? Going from doing these like bodybuilding, hey, I'm working out, getting ready to compete type of videos to videos where you become an influencer for products, and then you're doing, you know, more provocative poses and then going on this OnlyFans site. So Dr. Judy Ho, Dr. Robbie Ludwig. Dr. Robbie Ludwig, I'll ask you first. This 6-year transformation, what are your thoughts about that? You know, you start, you're doing some sort of innocent bodybuilding videos and you end up in a different place and now end up charged with murder.
Yeah. I don't know that we could blame the OnlyFans job that she created for herself, but I think what's interesting is that she wanted to be a bodybuilder, a female bodybuilder, so being strong was very important to her. And then it appears that she used her sexuality as a way to seduce and control. For her OnlyFans channel, it helped her to be a very popular influencer, but it never addresses the underlying issues and problems that she has. You know, it's probably safe. There's a screen. She's not going to harm anyone on OnlyFans. But in a relationship, that's where her demons come out. And I'd really love to learn about this girl's history. Was, you know, were her parents abusive? I'd like to rule out, was there any sexual abuse? It just seems that there are a lot of demons that she never addressed. And here's the sad thing. It culminated into her being murderous. And people can end up being murderous if they don't address their aggressive issues, even if they don't want to be. So consciously, they may think, I'd never harm somebody, but they end up in that space because they have control over their anger and rage.
Dr. Judy Ho, your thoughts about this transformation in her public life online and where she is now?
Well, Vinnie, she started by really exuding a ton of positivity and helping other people build their confidence. I think people watched her, subscribed to her channel, followed her because they felt like she was a good and positive role model, especially during her bodybuilding phase. And bodybuilding is obviously more rare among females. And so she was taking on this task that was traditionally relegated to males. And I think that probably made her feel powerful and, again, like a suitable positive role model for many young women. I think as social media can become, for individuals who become famous on social media, it's not unlike traditional celebrities where you just get more and more pressure. It feels like everyone is watching your next move. What are you going to do that's new and relevant? Are you going to be the popular person forever, or is somebody else going to come and essentially take away everything that you've accomplished? I think she probably wrestled with a lot of those pressures, probably internally, and thinking, how do I one-up myself essentially to stay relevant? And that might be why she started to do some of this more seductive and provocative work. And even then, what you saw in terms of her public persona was still this positive, cheery, happy person. And so I think when we discovered sort of the underbelly and the sad, tragic relationship that she had with her now deceased boyfriend, you see that there's this complete other side that she's obscured from her popular persona.
Dr. Judy Ho, we're out of time. I'm up against one of those hard breaks. Dr. Judy Ho, thank you so much. Dr. Robbie Ludwig, have a great weekend.